The greatest deceptions are not built on lies. They are built on truth, a single, perfect, poisoned truth. In 1944, from a bunker of concrete and steel, Adolf Hitler stared at a map. His empire was shrinking. The invasion was coming. He knew it. He demanded one thing from his generals, his spies, his entire apparatus of terror: truth. Where would the blow fall? And one man, above all others, gave him that truth. A truth so perfect, so detailed, and so convincing. It was a complete fabrication. A lie so powerful, it paralyzed 19 German divisions. A lie that sealed the fate of the Third Reich. This is the story of Juan Pujol Garcia, a man known to the Germans as Arabelle, their most trusted agent, and to the British as Garbo, the greatest actor in the world. This is the story of the spy who made Adolf Hitler hear his own funeral. To find this man, you must not look in the polished halls of Cambridge or the clandestine clubs of London. You must look in the dust. You must go to Spain in the late 1930s. Juan Pujol Garcia was a nobody. He was a failed chicken farmer. He was an unsuccessful hotel manager. He was a man with a gentle face and a profound, burning hatred. But his hatred was not simple. It was not for one side. He had lived through the Spanish Civil War, a conflict that had ripped his country in two. He had been imprisoned by the Republicans. He had been forced to fight for the nationalists. He had watched in horror as both the fascists and the communists devoured his world with a blind ideological fury. He saw them as the same, two heads of the same dragon. In this crucible of chaos, a singular conviction was forged in his soul, that this new, greater war, the one now engulfing the world, was a war against that very same dragon, now embodied by the Third Reich. He was not a soldier. He was not a politician. He was a small man. But he decided, with a quiet, unshakable certainty, that he would do something. He would fight this evil, not with a gun, but with his mind. He would become a spy. So, in 1941, he walked into the British Embassy in Madrid. He offered his services. He explained with desperate sincerity that he wanted to help the Allied cause. The British looked at this unimpressive Spaniard, this man with no connections, no training, and no experience. And they laughed. They rejected him, politely but firmly. He was not what they were looking for. Here, the story of a normal man would end. But Juan Pujol was not a normal man. He was a man of singular, almost insane audacity. He was possessed by an idea. If the British would not have him as a friend, he would force their hand. He would make himself so valuable that they had to recruit him. And how would he do that? He walked out of the British Embassy, crossed the city, and walked into the German one. He presented himself as a fanatical fascist, a Spanish official who believed in the new order, and who was in a perfect position to travel to London. He offered himself to the Abwehr, the German military intelligence. The Germans, unlike the British, were impressed. His passion seemed genuine. His cover story was plausible. They gave him a crash course in spycraft, invisible ink, ciphers, tradecraft, a few $1,000s, and a code name, Arabelle. His mission? Go to England, build a network of agents, and send back every secret you can find. Pujol took their money and their training. And he did not go to England. He went to Lisbon. Lisbon, in 1941, was the whispering capital of the world. It was a city of light and shadow, officially neutral, but crawling with spies from every warring nation. They filled the cafes, they traded secrets in hotel lobbies, they watched each other from behind newspapers. Into this nest of vipers walked Juan Pujol, a man on a mission that was, by any rational measure, impossible. He had to convince the German High Command that he was in London, when he was, in fact, in Portugal. And he had to do it with no support, no intelligence, and no network. He had only a library. He checked into a small room and began his performance. He bought a blue guide to Britain. He got his hands on English newspapers, railroad timetables, and maps. And from these dry public sources, he began to write. He began to invent. He did not just create reports. He created a world. He wrote to his German handlers, his letters filled with secret information. All of it plausible, all of it meticulously crafted from his reference books. He described troop movements he'd seen in London, movements he'd invented based on which rail lines looked most logical for military transport. He reported on naval convoys leaving Liverpool, convoys he'd fabricated from shipping news he'd read in the paper. But the genius was not in the facts. It was in the drama. He didn't just invent a network. He invented people. He created a cast of 27 fictional sub-agents. There was a disgruntled Welsh nationalist eager to sabotage the British. There was a talkative secretary inside the Ministry of Information. There was a Swiss businessman, a KLM pilot, a student, a soldier. He gave them all personalities, all motivations, all flaws. He wrote as them. His reports to Berlin became a sprawling operatic novel. He described their petty jealousies, their fears, their demands for more money. He made them human. This was not just spycraft. This was art. He was a writer, a director, and the star of his own one-man show. And the Germans believed him. They believed every word. His reports were considered so valuable, so high-level, that they were read by the German High Command. They were, in short, a sensation. But his performance was almost too good. He was creating details so specific, they were bound to be wrong. In one report, he confidently stated that in Glasgow, he'd met a contact, and that in this part of Scotland, they will do anything for a liter of wine. The Germans, who knew Britain was not on the metric system, gently corrected him. Pujol, without missing a beat, wrote back in a fury. His contact in Glasgow was a fool, he raged. He had been misled. He would never trust that source again. His anger, his human error, only made him more believable. His greatest invention was when he decided one of his agents had to die. He wrote a tragic emotional report. His best agent, he claimed, had fallen ill and died in his arms. He included a request for a pension for the grieving widow. The German government, moved by this loyalty and loss, approved the pension. Juan Pujol, the failed chicken farmer, was now successfully defrauding the Third Reich's pension fund for a woman who did not exist. This entire performance was exhausting, expensive, and profoundly dangerous. Pujol was running out of money. He was terrified of being discovered. He knew he couldn't maintain this fiction from a Lisbon library forever. He had to reach the British. He had to prove his worth. He tried again, this time through the Americans. He approached the U.S. naval attaché, who was, thankfully, intelligent enough to realize this man was either insane or the most brilliant spy in Europe. The Americans contacted their British counterparts. The British, meanwhile, had a problem. For months, they had been intercepting German messages from Agent Arabelle. The messages were clearly originating from inside Britain, but MI5's domestic surveillance, the legendary double-cross system, knew for a fact that no German agent was operating undeclared. They were baffled. They were intercepting reports about phantom naval operations that were happening, but which Arabelle was reporting with slight, specific, wrong details. They realized someone was feeding the Germans a stream of brilliant, creative, and almost correct disinformation. But from where? And who? When the American tip came in, the puzzle pieces snapped together. They found Pujol in Lisbon, a nervous man in a cheap suit, carrying the weight of 27 fictional lives on his shoulders. They flew him to London in secret. He was brought to an office. He met his new case officer, a brilliant multilingual MI5 man named Thomas Tommy Harris. Pujol at last had a partner. The British gave him a new code name, one worthy of his talents. They called him Garbo, the greatest actor in the world. If you find this story of one man's impossible audacity as compelling as we do, please take a moment to subscribe. We are dedicated to finding these hidden narratives of courage and ingenuity. and your support allows us to continue our work. The year was now 1943. Garbo was in England. The one-man show was over. Now he had a full production company. MI5 and Tommy Harris were his directors. They gave him a secure radio. They gave him a budget. They gave him real intelligence. The Garbo network was no longer just an invention. It was the most sophisticated disinformation weapon in the Allied arsenal. The game changed completely. Garbo and Harris began to weave a new tapestry, this one even more intricate. The goal was to build Arabelle's credibility to such an unassailable height that when the time came, the Germans would believe one single critical lie. To do this, they fed him a constant stream of truth. 90% of Garbo's reports were now meticulously, verifiably true. He reported on real troop movements, 24 hours after they had happened. Too late for the Germans to act, but just in time to prove he was right. He reported on the imminent Allied invasion of North Africa, Operation Torch. His message by design was delayed in transit by his German handlers. When it finally reached Berlin, after the landings had begun, the Germans were horrified. Their best agent had warned them, and they had been too slow. His credibility became godlike. Garbo was no longer just a spy. He was a personality. He and Harris wrote his reports with a distinct voice. Arrogant, fanatical, demanding, and utterly brilliant. He complained about his handlers. He demanded more money. He boasted of his successes. He was, in short, the perfect prima donna, and his German handlers treated him as such. They fawned over him. They sent him vast sums of money. They apologized when they made mistakes. They had become emotionally invested in their super spy. All of this was the prelude, the long, careful setup for the greatest deception in military history, Operation Fortitude. By 1944, everyone knew the invasion was coming. The entire question was where. The Germans, and Hitler himself, were convinced it would be the Pas de Calais, the shortest point across the Channel. The Allies had to land in Normandy. The success of D-Day, the lives of hundreds of thousands of men, and the liberation of Europe all depended on making Hitler keep his panzers in Calais. To do this, the Allies created a phantom, the first U.S. Army group, FUSAG, an entire army of inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, and fake radio signals, all positioned in Kent, all pointing at Calais. General George S. Patton, the man the Germans feared most, was put in command of this ghost army. But rubber tanks and radio chatter are not enough. The Germans were not stupid. They needed human intelligence to confirm the illusion. They needed their best man. They needed Arabelle. This was Garbo's moment. His entire network, all 27 imaginary souls, now began to sing the same beautiful, terrible song. His Welsh nationalist reported seeing the unit patches of FUSAG. His secretary overheard officers talking about Patton's plans. His KLM pilot reported massive airfields being prepared in the southeast. Garbo was the one who tied it all together. He was the one who proved to Berlin that the FUSAG army was real, that it was the main invasion force, and that Calais was the target. The psychological pressure on Juan Pujol must have been unbearable. He was no longer a lone fantasist in a library. He was a man sitting in a safe house in London, holding the fate of the world in his hands. He was living a lie 24 hours a day. He was Arabelle. He was his 27 agents. He and Harris would work for days, agonizing over the precise wording of a single report. A single mistake, a single note of doubt, could shatter the entire illusion. He was fighting a war of words, a battle of psychology against the entire German high command. And he was winning. This is the point where history balanced on the knife edge of one man's imagination. As the real invasion force gathered in the south, Garbo's network was at the peak of its power, feeding Hitler the lie he so desperately wanted to believe. Then came the night of June 5th, 1944. The real armada, the largest in human history, set sail for Normandy. Garbo knew He and Tommy Harris sat by their radio, knowing that thousands of men were at that very moment sailing into a wall of fire. The deception had to hold. On the morning of June 6th, as the first reports of landings at Normandy reached Hitler's bunker, there was chaos. Was this it? Was this the invasion? The German generals on the ground were frantic. Rommel was on leave. The command structure was confused. Hitler's generals, like von Rundstedt, urged him to release the panzers, to move the 15th Army from Calais and crush the Normandy beachhead before it could be established. A swift, decisive counterattack on that first day could have driven the Allies back into the sea. The war could have been lost on Omaha Beach. Hitler hesitated. He looked at the map. He saw the diversion at Normandy, and he saw the real threat, the one his generals didn't understand. The massive, untouched army of Patton still waiting in Kent. How did he know? Because his most trusted agent, Arabelle, had warned him. But Garbo wasn't finished. He now performed his master stroke, the move that would earn him the title of this story. He did not immediately report the Normandy landings. He waited. Then, in the late morning of D-Day, he sent a frantic, furious message to his German handlers. He was outraged. He claimed his agent in the south had just gotten the report to him. The landings were happening. Why had Berlin not acted on his previous intelligence? But then came the critical line. He apologized for the delay of his report, but insisted that this Normandy landing was, just as he had always said, a feint, a diversion, a trick to draw the panzers away. He confirmed that Patton's Fusag was still in Kent, preparing for the real attack at Calais. This was the moment. This was the funeral. For Adolf Hitler, that message was the truth he had been waiting for. It confirmed his every bias. It validated his every instinct. His generals were wrong. His spy was right. He made the fatal decision. The panzers would not move. The 15th Army would stay at Calais. Imagine the sound in that bunker. It was not a sound of bombs or of screaming. It was the sound of a decision, the sound of silence, the sound of 19 divisions, the most powerful armored force in France, sitting perfectly still. That silence was the funeral dirge of the Third Reich, and Juan Pujol Garcia, Garbo, was its composer. For 7 critical, agonizing weeks, as the Allies fought and bled to solidify their foothold in the Normandy hedgerows, Hitler's best troops sat and waited. They waited for an army of rubber. They waited for a phantom. They waited because Garbo told them to. By the time Hitler finally realized he had been fooled, it was too late. The beachhead was secure. The breakout had begun. The war in the West was lost. Garbo's story does not end there. In an episode of almost comical irony, his reputation with the Germans was so good, his excuses so convincing, that they never realized he had fooled them. In July 1944, after the deception was complete, the German High Command sent him a message for his extraordinary services to the Reich, which they believed had been undermined by their own generals' incompetence. They were awarding him the Iron Cross. The only way to deliver it, of course, was through his own network. The British dutifully had a medal manufactured and presented it to him in a quiet ceremony. 5 months later, King George VI made Juan Pujol Garcia a member of the Order of the British Empire. He is, to this day, the only person in the Second World War to receive the highest decorations from both sides, one for his service and one for his performance. When the war ended, Garbo was not a hero. He was a liability. He was a man who knew too many secrets. But more than that, he was terrified. He was convinced that surviving Nazis, realizing the depth of his betrayal, would hunt him down and kill him. He had fooled them, and they would never forgive him. He needed to disappear. With the help of Tommy Harris and MI5, he vanished. He was given a new identity. A story was fabricated that he had contracted a disease and died in Africa. The world, and his German handlers, believed he was dead. Juan Pujol Garcia, the man who was Arabelle, the man who was Garbo, the man who was 27 different people. became a ghost, for real this time. He moved to Venezuela. He opened a small bookstore and gift shop. He lived a life of total, quiet anonymity. He married. He had children. He told no one. For nearly 40 years, the world's greatest spy lived as a humble shopkeeper, his secrets locked behind a gentle smile. The world believed Garbo was dead. The man who had saved the world simply read his books. He was only discovered in 1984 when a British historian, obsessed with the legend of Agent Garbo, refused to believe he was dead and embarked on a global quest to find him. He tracked him to that small shop in Venezuela. He walked in and spoke the name. The ghost, now an old man, finally confessed. He was brought back to England. He toured the beaches of Normandy, weeping at the graves of the men he had helped, in his own way, to save. He was presented to royalty and reunited with the few surviving intelligence officers who had known his secret. The world was, at last, allowed to thank the man who had been invisible. The story of Juan Pujol Garcia is a testament to the most powerful and most underrated weapon of war: the human imagination. He was not a soldier. He was a storyteller. He fought a war not of bullets, but of belief. He saw a world consumed by a monstrous ideology and decided to fight it with the only tools he had: his mind, his courage, and his profound understanding of the human heart. He understood that to defeat a tyrant, you must first understand what he wishes to be true. He proved that one man, armed with a moral conviction and a brilliant lie, can be more powerful than all the armies of the world. He was a man who fought a war with paper and built a victory out of a whisper. These are the stories that live in the shadows of history. They are the narratives of quiet courage, of moral strength, of the profound, unseen impact one person can have on the world. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, please subscribe and join us in keeping their memory alive.